I hope everyone's been enjoying their summer so far. I'm headed back to work soon. I'm finishing up my maternity leave, but my family was lucky enough to book one last trip, one last little family vacation. As usual, I got some stamps. Hopefully I can do some Xtremephilately. I'm pretty excited because we are going somewhere that I've never been before. I'll show you guys my stamps back at the house.
That's right, everybody. We are flying to Halifax, which is the capital of Nova Scotia. Our trip is only 3 days long, so pretty quick, but I'm hoping we can visit some of the popular sites there and of course do some Xtremephilately. But before we go and do that, I want to talk to you about this stamp here, which commemorates a major event in the history of Halifax. This stamp, issued in 2017, commemorates the 100-year anniversary of the Halifax Explosion, a historical event that actually, I'm shocked, is not more well known around the rest of the world or even Canada. On the stamp, we see an excerpt from a newspaper article declaring Halifax wrecked, more than 1,000 killed, many thousands injured and homeless. In the foreground, we see 2 ships in the water and a massive cloud of smoke rising above them, leaving us with an ominous feeling. This was an explosion so intense that it was the largest man-made explosion before the atomic bomb. It cost the lives of almost 2,000 people. To understand what happened here, let's set the stage of the city of Halifax in 1917. It's the middle of the First World War, and as a port city on the Atlantic, Halifax was an important harbor for the Allies, as one of the last stops for ships in North America before heading off to Europe. Part of what made Halifax such an ideal port for the war was that it has a naturally enclosed bay, the Bedford Basin. This harbor provides natural protection for ships, especially against attacks by German U-boat submarines. Overnight, anti-submarine nets were put up and boat traffic was paused until the next morning. The Bedford Basin is separated from the Atlantic Ocean by a strait called the Narrows. This is where the 2 ships collided on the morning of December 6, 1917, causing this massive historical explosion. How this all came to be was due to a number of mistakes and unfortunate circumstances. The 2 ships that collided were the SS Imo, a Norwegian ship, and the MontBlanc, a French ship loaded to the brim with explosives. The Imo had arrived at Halifax Harbor a few days prior. She was sailing in ballast, which I learned in nautical terms means basically empty, en route to New York to pick up supplies for Belgian relief. The Imo stopped at the harbor to refuel on coal. She was given clearance to depart on the evening of December 5th, but because there was a delay in loading the coal, they were not able to set sail before the anti-submarine nets were put up for the night. Meanwhile, the ship MontBlanc had just arrived from New York. She was loaded to the brim with explosives, including TNT, picric acid, gun cotton, and to top it all off, because they had a little bit of extra room on deck, barrels of basically gasoline, benzol, which was used for motor fuel. This cargo was so dangerous that when the ship was loaded, the dock workers had to wear special clothing made from canvas and rubber-soled boots to prevent any sparks from igniting the cargo during the loading process. One interesting thing I learned was that the captain of this ship, Émile Lemedec, had no say at all in what his cargo was or how much he would take. During the war, French ships and their captains were basically conscripted by the government and had to follow whatever their orders were. Refusing to do so would be considered the same as deserting the army. On top of all this, the MontBlanc was also 18 years old and considerably slow moving. The fastest that it could move was 8 knots, which is basically 9 miles per hour. It was so slow, especially loaded to full capacity, that she did not meet the minimum speed requirements to sail with any convoys leaving from New York. The MontBlanc was instructed to head up north to Halifax and hope to join a convoy escort across the ocean there. So poor Captain Lemedec has to lug this slow, gigantic bomb all the way up to Halifax unescorted, and obviously he was nervous. Back then, ships could signal that they were carrying dangerous cargo by flying a red flag, but it wasn't mandatory. And because he was traveling unescorted, he decided not to put up the red flag because he thought it would be basically a big target for German U-boats. The MontBlanc and her crew arrived at the outside of Halifax Harbor on December 5th, and just like the SS Imo and her crew on the other side, arrived too late to enter before the anti-submarine nets were put into place. By the way, all ships entering the harbor had to have their cargo inspected. There were a number of red flags, or I guess from what I just described, lack of red flags, about the inspection process as well. First of all, the inspections officer only spoke English, and Le Medic only spoke French. And then apparently the contents listed on the ship manifest were either really vague or just straight up did not mention all of the actual explosives that were on the ship. There was also no mention of any special loading or unloading procedures that had been taken in New York, as that would have also alerted the inspections officer to the dangerous cargo of the MontBlanc. Apparently, this was all done for the sake of preventing the spread of sensitive information. They didn't want spies finding out about all the munitions on the ship and deciding to blow it up, but obviously there's a point where sharing too little information is just as dangerous as sharing too much. There were also major communication issues in general at this harbor. There were 3 authorities running things: the Royal Canadian Navy, which was technically in charge of boat traffic in and out of the harbor, the British Royal Navy, which were in charge of convoys and inspections of all Allied ships, and the Harbor Pilot Commission, which were a group of independent pilots who were hired by the ships to safely navigate them in and out of the harbor. None of these groups really had any jurisdiction over the other, and there were known communication issues and political authority issues between the 3 groups. The harbor master of the Canadian Navy had apparently complained to his superior 3 times in writing that the harbor pilots did not listen to him and did not follow his rules, and that there was really nothing he could do about it if they didn't listen to him. So, what happened on the morning of this accident? On the morning of December 6th, the anti-submarine nets were lowered for the day. Both ships would be guided through the harbor by their assigned harbor pilots. On the Bedford Basin side, the SS Emo started out towards the harbor. It was reported by witnesses to be speeding a little bit, perhaps to make up for the lost time in not being able to depart the night before. In front of the Emo comes an oncoming boat, the SS Clara, traveling on the wrong side. Normally, in ship navigation, ships pass each other port to port or on their left sides. But when the Emo encountered the SS Clara, they signaled each other using horn signals to pass on the right side or starboard side. Next, the SS Emo encountered a tugboat steamer, the Stella Maris. The Emo again decided to just pass on the left rather than slowing down or veering towards the right. By now, the Emo is pretty far out of their lane and still moving right along. Now up ahead comes the lumbering MontBlanc. As an incoming vessel, they had the right of way and gave a honk of their horn. But the Emo replied with 2 blasts, signaling that they are not going to stop and they're not going to move. Again, the MontBlanc gave 1 horn blast and the Emo replied again with 2. Probably freaking out at this point, the MontBlanc and crew made the decision to start veering left port towards the Halifax side. At the same time, the Emo threw their engines into reverse to try to slow down, but because she was sailing in ballast, it actually caused the ship to turn and it scraped the side of the MontBlanc. This scrape created sparks that immediately caught fire to those barrels of fuel sitting on the top deck. This created a huge fire that quickly spread out of control. Captain Le Medic, who knew he was sitting on a bomb where the fuse had just been lit, ordered his crew to abandon ship. They rowed to the Dartmouth side, yelling warnings at everybody that they passed, but alas, pretty much no one spoke French. The abandoned MontBlanc drifted towards Pier 6 on the Halifax side, with the raging fire getting worse and worse. It was now 9 a.m. and people were getting ready to go out to work and go to school, and now watching this huge fire taking place in the harbor. A number of other boats tried to pull the MontBlanc away from the pier or put out the fire, but being fueled by gasoline, the fire was too strong. At 9:04 a.m., the ship exploded. The blast leveled everything within a 2.5 kilometer radius. Over 1,700 people died and over 9,000 were injured. To complicate things even more, a snowstorm set in the next day. It made it difficult to dig people out of the wreckage or for relief to come from railways. An interesting side note, some relief was able to come from the Boston area by sea. They also sent up a train full of doctors and nurses who basically worked round the clock trying to help all the wounded. The city of Halifax now has a tradition where every year they send Boston a Christmas tree as a thank you for all of their help after the explosion. There are so many more stories about this event that fill entire books about the rescue efforts, the survivors, and heroes who knowingly forfeit their lives to try and save others. It was really a devastating and tragic event. Even though this event was over 100 years ago, there are still some reminders that can be found around the city. So finally, let's go and see some of them, and also tie in some Xtremephilately around the city of Halifax. Here's a view of the Narrows in real life, as seen from the Dartmouth side. The crew of the MontBlanc would have rowed to safety somewhere along this shoreline while the burning ship drifted into a pier on the other side of this channel. Here I can try to do some Xtremephilately. Psst, this is actually the wrong bridge. That one in the distance is the real Angus M. Walters Bridge. But don't you think they look pretty similar? I thought about not saying anything, but I just know some native Haligonian is gonna watch this and call me out on it, so I better fess up to my mistakes now. Here in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, is a piece of the MontBlanc's cannon that was flung here after the explosion.
So I'm here on the Dartmouth side of the Narrows. I'll put a picture of a map, but pieces of the MontBlanc blew up and were flung so far that one of them landed here. So here's part of the MontBlanc's cannon, and as you can see, we're nowhere even near water. Like now it's just a residential neighborhood, but that gives an idea of how much explosive debris flew everywhere.
You can also still see the MontBlanc's anchor, which landed on a completely other side of the city. But our visit did not take us to this area, unfortunately. Another reminder of the Halifax explosion can be found at Halifax City Hall.
So behind me is City Hall, and on this side the clock is frozen at 9:04 to mark the time that the explosion occurred.
Up the street, literally, is the Halifax Old Town Club. It stands just outside the borders of the Halifax Citadel. Originally installed in 1803, it was meant to help the nearby troops staying in the barracks to be a little bit more punctual. And before all these tall buildings came up, it could also be used by the townspeople below. This stamp is actually a painting of the clock by artist Jean-Paul Lemieux, whose paintings were chosen as the art for 12 stamps issued in celebration of Canada Day 1984. Finally, a few blocks down the street from the clock tower are the Halifax Public Gardens. This was actually one of my favorite sites in Halifax, and the gardens were surprisingly large. The Halifax Public Gardens are Canada's oldest surviving public garden, dating back to 1836. At the center of the garden is the bandstand, which is what we see on the stamp. This stamp was issued in 1991 as part of the Public Garden series.
So I'm crawling around the garden doing Xtremephilately in these bushes. But there's lots of cute ducks next to me. Hi, duck. Oh, I think they think I have food.
It was just a nice, calm, natural escape from the city, and obviously the flowers and landscaping are beautiful.
Look how beautiful the public gardens are. It's really serene and quiet. It feels like a Central Park version in Halifax. And there's my family.
Well, that's actually it for our visit to Halifax. But don't worry, we're going to some nearby towns in Nova Scotia over the next 2 days. Stay tuned for part 2 and part 3. Bye for now.
Do you like Xtremephilately? Yeah!